So one of the things that's really bothered me uh, for the last decade, to be honest, has been the media and their special treatment of Donald Trump. I kind of feel like maybe the winds are turning, but then again, maybe not. Can you just give me an overview of how you view the media and its coverage of the Trump administration today, vice what you've seen before in the past?
Oh, it has been so frustrating. I mean, I have been a member of the media for 25 years. I've worked for mainstream corporate media, nonprofit, now independent media. I've been on my own. And the coverage of Donald Trump has just been so distressing and is a reason, in my opinion, why he was elected not just once, but twice. I think that a lot of people still have not figured out how to cover a guy who lies with this much abandon and with so much malice.
Mhm.
Uh, I even saw the coverage of his July 4th speech that, so many people went home from because the weather was terrible. And even though it was, not exactly, well received even by the most MAGA-fied crowd, he still got the headlines that he wanted. It was an attack on communism. And
Mhm.
yes, there were some headlines that Donald Trump made this about himself, but most of it was kind of like Donald Trump gives like a muscular speech. And that's the kind of stuff that he and Stephen Miller live for. And giving Trump that kind of coverage just, is the dopamine hit that he and all of his followers need. And we don't need to be doing that in the media. There are great journalists out there that do tremendous work. ProPublica is breaking stories right and left about this administration and beyond. They had a great piece on Ken Paxton and his corruption today. And so, I can't lump everyone together, but I am continually frustrated with the coverage. And look what just happened today. And you are the subject matter expert on
Mhm.
what's going on in Iran, where we have, the ceasefire maybe blown apart. We have attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, but
Mhm.
are the media asking the right questions? Did they trumpet this ceasefire as a peace for all times more than they should have when it was no more than an MOU? I mean,
Mhm.
these are, I think, really important questions. And I understand that people are getting their news from all sorts of different areas. Not, there's no more Walter Cronkite and three
Right.
channels. Most people who are under 40 are not even turning on cable news. They don't even care. My kids are Gen Z. They would rather die than turn on CNN. I'm
Mhm.
I'm I'm heartened by what we do here at Lincoln Square with independent media, and I know people get their news from all sorts of sources, but the mainstream media still does that on the ground reporting. They're still in the room with Donald Trump, and it's still up to them to challenge him.
I Wow, you hit a lot of different things that just make me want to ask some more questions. So I think let me work backwards, starting with what you said. The mainstream media still gets the access to Donald Trump because that's how he's hardwired. He is time frozen in the 1980s, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan came out with regime change. And let me be very clear. It pissed me off because they sat on a lot of information that could have swayed congressional hearings for confirmations. All of these things, had they been reported in real time, could have
Mhm.
had an effect on how people voted to confirm and everything that we're dealing with, but they didn't. This whole thing of mainstream media, and to be completely blunt, a lot of these reporters see themselves as brands.
Yes.
Journalistic integrity be damned. I'm going to do what I can to maximize my access. Maggie Haberman did this the first term, and she's continuing to do it the second. And she has basically said, "So what?" Because she's been asked this question. My
Right.
my question for you is independent media the only place that we can go to get people to put out relevant information in a timely fashion? Because it seems like everything that's breaking is happening via independent media, and then mainstream media picks it up when they see a trend.
I do think that's happening more and more. We've seen that with the Epstein files. There are so many independent journalists out there who are the ones who are breaking stories and staying with these documents. Well, the mainstream media moves on to whatever Donald Trump, decides is the story of the day. They're always following him. Whereas I think a lot of people in the independent media are willing to tell the stories that they think are important and do that kind of digging. But to your point on authors like Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, and they're certainly not alone
No.
sitting on information. I, as a journalist, I find it wildly unethical. I mean, Bob Woodward did the same thing. He sat on a lot of really damaging information about Donald Trump's COVID response back in 2020. And that didn't cost him the election, but it did cost a lot of lives. And I think, that's worse. I mean, you have an obligation as a journalist. You're supposed to have an obligation to the public interest, to your readers, to your country. And that should come first. Being a journalist, one of the driving, factors why so many people get into it is you want to break the story first. Now, I understand that sitting on a story so that you can get a very hefty book deal, I get the pull of that. But, where's your sense of competition? Where's your sense of patriotism? And we need so much more of that. And it's very distressing to me to see that the most popular journalists, the ones who make the most money and are the biggest names, the biggest brands, which I think is a great and disturbing way of putting it, that they clearly put themselves first before the public.
Right.
And you know what? Even if it doesn't sway a single vote or a single committee hearing, this is information that the American public has a right to know. And until more journalists are willing to put that above their own self-interest, I'm afraid that the mainstream media will continue to be compromised.
I 100% agree. And I don't know if there's any way back, because now these companies are mega conglomerates. They have to rely on the White House to approve their mergers. See, Paramount, what Barry Weiss has done to CBS News,
yes,
is going to be studied by journalism majors moving forward, because it's almost befuddling how this has happened, right? And now I saw a report today that they're saying, oh, she's going to be out as soon as the merger is done, which means they're driving this and killing one of the most respected names we have ever had in news because of the monetary gain. It's a direct correlation. And I don't know how you get that back once you have violated that trust. And one more piece on this, you mentioned ProPublica, love their stuff. I've noticed that PBS, since congressional funding went away, has been way more aggressive in the stories that they show. More Perfect Union. I can go down this list of these independent journalists that it does my heart good to see that it's still there, but it pisses me off that the ones that have the most resources to make sure it can be its best have basically checked out for money.
Right. And, one of the open secrets in Washington is that reporters can get Trump's personal cell phone number. How much does that drive the kind of coverage of this guy? Because obviously you're not getting that number if you're going to do super, investigative work on this administration, if you're going to hold their feet to the fire. I mean, that creates such a perverse incentive structure. And it's really those journalists at the top that, they're very skilled and they're very experienced, but clearly between the corporate pressures and the pressure for fame, this is really corroding our journalistic entities. And there's an opportunity for a lot of independent outlets, and I'm glad to see it. But,
Mhm.
you know, when you see great institutions like the Washington Post be a shadow of itself, where a third of the newsroom has been fired by Jeff Bezos, where, you know, CBS News has been hollowed out, 60
Mhm.
Minutes is a joke thanks to Barry Weiss. God knows what's going to happen to CNN after the merger with Paramount and
Mhm.
Warner Brothers.
Mhm.
It's distressing, and you know, I don't know how these institutions will be able to find their way back. But
Mm.
you know, one last thing that I think should be stressed: when you do see that there are media entities that are willing to fight back, like the New York Times has been
Mhm.
sued by Donald Trump. You know, he threatened to sue them again very recently. They have
Mhm.
not backed down. Media Manners, which is, you know, a
Mhm.
scrappy little company that just basically holds the right wing to account by putting out what these people like Tucker Carlson are saying in their own voices. They didn't back down. They won a landmark lawsuit against the Trump administration. When you fight back against bullies, you win. And I'd
Mhm.
love to see more media companies go that route.